Dr. Jessica Gall Myrick is a former professor at Penn State. Now I can say a former professor. She used to be a professor. She had a PhD from UNC Chapel Hill. She recently transitioned from academia to industry. Many who are in college right now doing a PhD may be thinking, do I have to stay in academia after I finish PhD, or can I get a job in the industry? Well, as your professor would say, it depends, right? So today we will ask a couple of questions to a person, to a scholar who recently successfully transitioned from academia to the industry. Dr. Myrick is a prolific scholar in health and science communication who has done amazing work around health com. We have cited, read her work, and maybe she has reviewed many of our papers in related to health communication, communication technologies, media effects, and emotions. Dr. Myrick, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So, just tell us a little bit about your area of research. Of course, I know, but for the viewers who don't know your area of research.
Sure. I study health science and environmental messages, and in particular, the ways in which those messages might evoke emotional responses, or they may even be drawn to them because of their emotional states, and the ways in which reading a health news story or watching a YouTube video about someone's health experience sort of takes you on this emotional roller coaster, and then what people do with those feelings afterwards. When do they translate into behavior change, and when do they not?
Yeah, I recently published a piece where a reviewer recommended your study to cite from 2017 about the fear appeals and how health messages work. And I think that was encyclopedia piece we cited. So, how's your new job? Just the job right now? How?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my last day as a professor was December 31st of 2024, and then I started working in January for a company called Cook Medical, and they're a medical device manufacturer. And I work for a subsidiary of them called Cook Research Incorporated, and our group does all the clinical trials for any Cook-related device. And so I'm a senior clinical scientist there. And the bulk of that job is helping to design and execute clinical trials. And so that we're not medical doctors. We're not the people on the ground putting the devices
Yeah.
in, but we're thinking scientifically about how many people do you need? What are the objectives of this? Making sure we keep in line with all of the standards of rigorous science. So, before most of my academic career, all of my academic career, I was doing experiments and
Yeah.
seeing, all right, does this type of message versus that type of message evoke more fear or lead to more behavior change? So a similar principle, but now looking at a lot of the products I'm looking at are around vascular, access or stents, or doing biopsies with different types of needles, devices to help keep blood clots out. So is this device better than a competitor? Or is it better than its previous device? But a big part of this process too is thinking about who's going to be in your trial and trying to make sure that you get it's representative of the type of people who are afflicted with the type of illness that it's meant to treat. Because medical devices are when you need them, you need them.
Yeah.
It's a little less murky than, say, a pharmaceutical product. Like, do I need to take this or not? But if you have a blood clot, you need to get it out. You need, and especially if the medicine doesn't work, you need other, interventions. So thinking through, okay, is that data accurate about who generally is afflicted with these conditions? And then working to make sure the recruitment materials, which have to be very closely in line with any clinical data we have, but trying to get populations that are actually affected by these conditions and working with the physicians and the hospitals on that kind of recruitment. So that really attracted me as someone interested in health communication. And then thinking about the whole clinical trials life cycle at the end, once it's over, a lot of times there are these little boxes that patients can check. I'd like to know the results. And it might just be the same report that the company sends off to clinicaltrials.gov, which is very jargony. But Cook is trying to think through that patient-focused communication too, and how can we talk about why trials are important broadly, but the actual participants in each of our trials, thinking through ways to maybe have some more information get back to patients so they understand. And then in the future, when other patients might need a device or be interested in a clinical trial, that's out there too, and see it. So there are a few places where my previous life as a health communication researcher have come into play, but I also recently finished my master's in public health and took epidemiology and biostatistics courses through that. So this new position is
Oh.
kind of a nice um, combo of my background doing science, broadly speaking, and my interest in health, and then moving into this industry related space.
Yeah, so that sounds a very fascinating work, but related but different type of work we you do in health communication. And I think a while back I watched an episode of John Oliver's show. He was talking about he talks a lot about the medical and health
Hmm.
the U.S. and he was talking probably along the lines that every ninth American has some sort of medical device in their bodies. It's kind of the scope of the work is huge, especially in the
Yeah.
US. So yeah, my question, which you already alluded a little bit to it, that before you were doing like theoretically what kind of messages or interventions would work, to design certain health messages related to mental health or vaccines or climate change and others. But in this specific role, of course, you're not on the ground putting those devices into people's bodies, but you are kind of on the back end, kind of conducting clinical trials, right? So, how
Mhm.
do you think that the previous experience, other than the public health degree or the other courses you have taken, how was that experience kind of help you to have a more smoother transition?
Yeah, your training as someone who gets a doctorate degree is to think thoroughly and to think critically through all these different steps of the process. And so I think that really helps, just having that mindset of being able to go and read a journal article or a review, a meta-analysis, and be like, all right, what are the most important things, and what do I need to be on the lookout for? And again, like designing a clinical trial, it is the scientific principles are very similar to a lot of the research I was doing. So thinking critically and thoroughly, being able to multitask. I always had, as a social scientist, a lot of different projects going on at different stages, and that's absolutely the case in industry too. So far, I've been in it for all of 2 whole months now. That carries over the ability to write, and write. I mean, every part of that, from informally to formal publications. I'll still
Yeah.
be publishing as a clinical scientist, just very different types of journals. Although I do have a few of my old projects that I'm definitely going to keep working to wrap up and get out the door to communication journals. But yeah, the just the ability to generally write clearly and concisely, and to communicate well with a lot of different people. So I think, my training and my background and my experience is, as a faculty member, you always have to you're constantly intersecting with all different types of groups, with the finance office to get participants gift cards. Well, there's a finance office at Cook Medical too. It's just a lot bigger, and you're doing different types of things, understanding IRB. That is a huge thing in clinical science, as well as in what we're doing in academia. So I've actually been pretty surprised at how many of the things really overlap a
Overlap.
lot, just
Yeah.
a different scale. Um, and there are a lot of things that I used to do a lot that I won't have to do as much anymore. So there's a whole um, branch of the company devoted to statistics, and So they'll do the actual analyses, but my job as the clinical scientist is to make sure they're accurate and to double check and to ask
Right.
questions. So that skill set is still crucial, but I'm not necessarily the one
Doing it.
always in there writing the code. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's nice because otherwise, a lot of time we do rely on others. Hey, can you check these numbers or statistics or your GTAs or GRAs are doing that work? So, yeah, that's great. So one of the biggest questions when somebody leaves academia, right? I was watching a lot of YouTube videos of people who have shared their experiences just to kind of learn from them about this interview. And I've been also reading your work as well. And you've been very prolific, publishing between average 8 to 15 articles in a year, which is a lot of work. We all know that. And we tend to work as a faculty, on the weekends and take our laptops everywhere we go, even in the restrooms if possible.
Hmm.
So, so what one of the criticisms on academia is like we talk a lot about work-life balance, right? So before I get to that question, the biggest question is why did you leave academia?
Yeah, so I mean those things are related. And I left academia for a lot of reasons. It's sort of a little bit hard to summarize, but I would say that I first started thinking about it during COVID, and I think that's probably true for a lot of people in the
Yes.
last couple of years. And um, as a health communication researcher in particular, it was such a juxtaposition to be seeing a lot of the health messaging basically sort of violating a lot of theories and findings that we'd be like, it's going to cause reactance, or no, that's just there's too much uncertainty in this message. People aren't going to follow it. And having that information in my head and trying to figure out how do I get it into the hands of people who can use it. And a lot of times they didn't necessarily want to use it, or because we weren't medical doctors, didn't necessarily think it was accurate, right? So a lot of these just sort of field wide challenges, I think in social science wide challenges of trying to place your work. But it got me really interested in medicine in general, and how does that world operate, and that's what spurred me to look into the public health degree. Through Penn State, you can, as an employee, you can
Yeah.
take discounted
Yeah.
classes, and they have this online degree, and that enabled me to connect with more of the medical college faculty, and also during COVID started doing research with medical doctors as well. And happened to, at the time, also I had very high risk pregnancy with twins, and I was driving about 90 miles to the Penn State medical facilities in Hershey, Pennsylvania, too. So for better or for worse, just sort of coincidence, was constantly in that world and really, really wanting to do something a little closer to the end product, something a little more applied. I'll always love theory and I love geeking out about that. And I think it's really important. There's just that stage of my life and the occurrence of world and personal events. I really wanted to do something where I could get closer to helping people
Mm.
who were in a time of crisis, or helping the people who most need medical help. And so that was when I started thinking about it. And also during that time, I did my undergraduate and my master's back to back. And I worked for 3 years before I went to my PhD at North Carolina, Go Heels, for 3 years. So I had a little bit of real world experience, but then once you start that PhD, it's a lot of like, okay, I can just finish this and get a job. Okay, great. I just get a job. Now can I get tenure? Okay, great. Now
Yeah.
I got tenure. Can I get promoted?
Yeah.
And at each point in that, I never felt much more than relief. I mean, I did feel relief.
Yeah.
Um, but there was nothing really drastic that
Drastic. Yeah.
changed other than there was more work. And more work isn't
More
always bad.
committees, more work to do. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people call it the service dump, and I will call it that too. More committees, more everything. And even at a couple years ago, I became an endowed professor at Penn State. I'm teaching giant intro classes all the time, teaching 3 days a week. Things that just, I didn't necessarily envision doing that at that stage in my career. When I had started my PhD, I kind of thought, oh, well, I'll get in this
Better and
position
better and
and
better.
I'll have less to teach and I'll have more time to do research. And research is the thing of the, research teaching service. Research really energizes me. I like to teach too. Actually really like giving the lectures and big lectures, but I'm horrible at the email and I'm horrible at the bureaucracy that comes with it. And having 340 students, like they're sending so many emails and I'm repeating myself again and again. So it was kind of this perfect storm of COVID, my high risk pregnancy, the things just even as the title under my name changed, all that changed was the amount of work and not the type of work. And so it was a lot of different considerations around that, and starting to see other people go into industry. I was like, oh, I guess I could do that. I guess that is an option. And we've had people in our field and other social sciences. A lot of them end up working at Meta for
Yeah.
Facebook or Instagram, and everyone needs to do what they need to do. For whatever reason, that didn't appeal to me as much as something in like health or medicine. And I looked a lot at public health jobs. I looked a lot at jobs at CDC or the FDA or the NIH. And in retrospect, with now a lot of those people have most unfortunately lost their jobs.
Yes.
It's I have no idea how I sort of lucked out and got a job that fit me well. I am from born and raised in Indiana, and Cook Medical is actually based in Indiana as a family-owned company. So it is a for-profit company, but is not traded on the stock market. And I liked that about it a lot too. So it gave me a tie back to my home, and as a company that was, you know, not fully immersed in that like giant corporate publicly
Yeah.
traded world. And the other thing that I started to realize in the last couple of years and had me looking at industry jobs was that I like to move. I like to go fast. I want to make a change. And that's not really how academia is designed. And that in many ways is for a good reason, but in other ways I find myself getting frustrated and I'm like, well, I'm in a system that is not meant to go fast. So my frustration is partly because there's a mismatch between um, my personality and my work habits and the way this particular system is. So,
I think
but
that perfectly sums up because I think
yeah,
during COVID, a lot of people thought about their careers, about early retirements, changing fields, and a lot of things because it was a lot of chaos around. And I think especially with the health com folks, and there was a huge frustration like, oh, this is not what we want, right? And yes, you have a COVID vaccine, but nobody's getting the shot. So what do? You all the time you discounted or kind of degraded social science for a lot of years, number of years, and you think it's not important. Designing, having vaccines, developing vaccines, designing something is more important than convincing people, persuading people to take something. So I think that make a lot of sense. And also that is true as you progress in your career, you think the things will be little better, as you expect. But if it doesn't work that way, it's like, you know what? It doesn't kind of excite me. Yes, you get the tenure, you get the promotion, but it's not other than like, "Ah, okay, thank God I got it. Now I made it, so I can prove to certain people like, yes, I was worthy of getting tenure, at a certain places. So, now you have left academia and it's been almost 3 months, and you've been in academia for 12 to 15 years, right? So how's the work-life balance going on for you as a new person on this new job?
yeah, so far a lot of my first 2 months was training. I mean, and it would differ by,
Yeah.
corporation and where you are, but as a medical device company, we need to really make sure we're doing everything by the book and legally, ethically. And so there was a lot of training and assessments around, FDA rules. There's medical device regulations in every country and in the EU. So learning that, learning cook medicals processes for making sure that everything is perfect and we're protecting patients and we're keeping their health on top. So um, but that part, it was really like kind of the mostly the dream of like I'm gonna close my laptop at 5 and on Friday I'm gonna close my laptop and it's yeah I don't really have to open it back up until Monday. Once training
Yeah.
was over, there have been some days where I have opened my laptop other times, but a lot of it is being new and trying to learn the lingo. When I interviewed there were a lot of questions around, and this was not the first job I interviewed for. I did not get other jobs that I did interview for, and often the questions were around, well, this is a career change or a different field. Like, how are you going to transition? And a lot of stereotypes about faculty and academics being they're sort of slow and hard to learn. And I was like, I'm a fast learner. I can do this. And so now I'm like, oh, I really need to be a fast learner. I've been putting a little bit of pressure on myself. So just going through and reading different things. I found an app that's sort of like mini medical school to try to teach myself some of the anatomy, which I really, really have enjoyed. But definitely, it's less. It occupies less space in my head
Which is
after.
nice, which is nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and that'll change as it goes on. I'm sure it will. But one of the things about being a faculty member, and one of the great things is that you get to work with students and both undergraduate and graduate students. And I still have two PhD advisees that I'm working with at Penn State. You can continue advising for a year after you've left the university. And so even a lot of the times if I'm working at night or on the weekends, it's because I want to give them some feedback on their dissertation work and or job talks and stuff like that.
Do you, since then, you still working with them now? Do they ask you a question like, Dr. Myrick, I want to go in, in the well, and it's
Oh,
like, well,
yeah, I mean, I don't want to violate their specific confidences, but since sort of publicly, by public, I just mean social media, announced
yes,
that I
yes,
was making this career move, I've got a lot of messages from a lot of people that I've known over the years, sort of, various stages of thinking about these possibilities. But I think graduate students are really hungry to know more about what
yes,
are the
absolutely.
alternatives. And even I graduated my PhD in 2013, so it's been 12 years. But there were more PhD students than there were tenure track jobs, and there are way more PhD students than there are R1 research focused tenure track jobs. So for a really long time, we've sort of been like, well, try your best, try to get one of those jobs. Something might work out. If you don't get one right away, apply again in a few years. And it would help to have more um, thoughtful training and consideration of, okay, how do we help graduate students in particular, PhD students, take these research and critical thinking and writing skills. But then the problem is, and I suffered from this up until January, the exact same thing was I haven't really been in industry. I mean, I did work as a journalist. I didn't,
Yeah.
it was not, before, but not the same thing as a sort of more research focused. So, I think connecting with alums, connecting with other former employees as an EV to show PhD students those options. But it is, to sort of circle back too, students are very interested in work-life balance. That has been a big shift we've seen. Um,
I think it's maybe you can tell better that the problem is that we want somebody with the tenure research focused. We don't want to hire somebody from the industry as a tenure track because of the certain rules and regulations. And we ended up in the same problem that yes, we can expose students to certain extent through guest lectures from those experts, but like we cannot bring them to campus permanently who can
mhm,
help you transition out of academia, because then what would happen to those professors' legacy who are trying to train their students to do the similar kind of work or working on the similar kind of theories and methods and certain
mhm.
things. So I think it's still more complex, and I don't see there are more conversations happening. Maybe you have seen at different places if there are some active conversations in academia how to prepare students, with more critical thinking or with more kind of skill set which can be used outside academia, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of this, from what I've observed, is often not in the individual departments or our colleges of communication, but it's more so like the graduate school at your university and sort of piggybacking on other programs they've had for the STEM fields, because that's long, long been the case for STEM fields, that many, if not, for maybe a majority of their graduates aren't going to go into academia. So a lot of places have those resources broadly to talk about the broad outlines, but how it applies to a social science researcher is a little trickier. And, I talked to actually former students I knew who had gone into industry and asked them for advice. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But a lot of it is just networking and reading. There are groups now. For a long time there's this professor is in group on
Yes.
Facebook. There's now professor is out or
Oh,
something
wow.
like that. The professor is out, so that's a place for people to go. But it's also, I would say, actually fits what I think graduate education should be, and that you are learning to learn.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think students get into the trap of, well, no one told me how to do this, or no one told me what this was going to be like.
Yeah.
Correct. There's a reason this is the terminal degree. You are making new knowledge. You need to learn how to learn. You need to learn how to teach yourself. And I think the same applies for if we have PhD students who are interested in industry, they need to reach out and network. And there is now a lot of material. Like you
Yeah.
can watch YouTube videos. There are a lot of people who've made this their own business, in
Oh,
fact, to
yes.
help PhDs and social science PhDs transition. So it's out there. It's really just up to you to try to figure it out and to apply it to your own specific situation. So I do think we need to be more proactive in helping our graduate students to at least see that path, that to know that it is there and to have some initial foothold. But just like you want to learn a new analysis type, or you want to learn a new context area, or want to add eye tracking, and it's not always your advisor's job. And in fact, too much handholding, you're not really going to learn it. So there's a little bit of a balance there
Yeah.
too.
So as you said, this was not, of course, the first job you landed, or you landed, but you have interviewed for other. So how was it
Hmm.
different than academia? Because in academia, you apply 50, 60 jobs, and then you wait for 6 to 8 months, and then you go to the campus interviews. It's very extensive.
Hmm.
Zoom made it easy, of course, to a certain extent, that you do a Zoom round and then you go in person, reference check. It takes a lot of time, and then at the end, it may not work because the university didn't approve the position or something. So, how
Hmm.
was for you? How was it different this experience dealing with industry, finding a job?
I don't think I applied for 60 jobs total, but I would apply. I knew there were some places that I was interested in working, and there are research groups outside of academia. A lot of graduate students don't even know this. There are groups like RTI, used to be called Research Triangle Institute, RAND, MITRE, NORC, all these acronyms that then become single words or phrases. But there are groups out there that do research, and so I would connect with people at them. I would try to talk to people I knew there. Sometimes I would get to do informational interviews with HR reps. Those didn't usually go anywhere, but they helped me get a better feel for, all right, what does this job title even mean? Because
Yeah.
that's a lot of it too. Is figuring, is this actually something that I can do or I want to do? Um, and so, and the other thing with me is I have a family, and so I couldn't just apply for anything anywhere. I was looking for remote jobs or jobs that might be possibly back in Indiana, where my rest of my family is, and so I didn't. And the timing too. So once I started a school year, it was like, all right, I can, I can kind of leave at semester or at the end, but I didn't want to leave anyone hanging in the middle of a semester. So I would look a lot on LinkedIn and talk to friends that I knew in these other areas and try to feel that out. But so yeah, 12-ish years post PhD, I had become a full professor. A lot of these places, they have sort of entry level researcher type positions. I'll just call it researcher for sake of simplicity. And then they have senior level. postings, and sort of time wise and title wise, I fit the senior, but a lot of times they're looking for people with big federal grants.
Mhm.
Uh, and PI on big federal grants. So much less common in our field. We do have some amazing young scholars who are doing that, and other age scholars. Um, but so I would maybe get an intro Zoom, but then like academia, they want the indirect costs that come with those. And so they're like, oh, you're co-PI in a couple, but oh, you would, really kind of fit more of this junior role, but that's below your, you
Mhm.
know, standing. And I'd be like, no, no, I'll do it. I'll do junior. Like, but they're like, oh, that's kind of, we don't want you to be upset. So there's a little bit of mismatch just because of the stage of my career I was in and being a social scientist and not necessarily having been PI on an NIH or an NSF grant. So that that was when once I that had happened a few times. And even at one place that happened one year and I applied again the next year and they were like, "Oh, we're so glad you applied again. Your work is so interesting and it's right on the nose and you've got all the skills, but we're just not sure." So, um, once that happened a few times, I was like, "All right, I need to broaden my scope beyond just these sort of research think tanks." And see what else is out there in industry. And I had friends I knew at Cook Medical and some other people who worked at some other industry related groups. And so that was the process. And then even at Cook, I had one series of interviews where it was the Zoom, then it was in person, and I didn't get that. And the second one, it was two Zooms, like a sort of typical half-hour question and answer Zoom, then a second hour-long Zoom where I was given a product and a journal article about the product, and I had to give a presentation as if I were talking to medical doctors about our findings. And then I had an in-person interview as well. That was also a little bit of Q&A, and I had to give a presentation on my own work, and then some sort of hypothetical scenarios. All right, you're in this role. What would you do? So even within an organization, the type of interview and how you get to it um, can be very different. But that was my experience at least.
In academia, we always think about the right fit, right? Even though
Mhm.
you research, we know you can teach, we know you can do research, but you're not the right fit. In your experience, what do you think they look for in those people? Are they thinking like, yeah, they make sure that you will be happy, or did look for like, yeah, this is what we want, or this is what you want, or how does that play
Mhm.
out in the industry?
Yeah, I think they absolutely are interested in fit, but I would say it's a little different because in academia, when you hire a faculty member, you're thinking about someone who you want to be there for ideally the rest of their career. That's a
Yes.
really long commitment.
Yeah.
And industry, that's not the case. So I think they might be a teeny bit more willing to take a risk on someone. They're going to always want those bare minimum skills. And sometimes it's up to you and they want shorter cover letters, much shorter than we typically would have. But to be able to communicate that and have a functional resume that's about your skills, then not just, pages and pages of publications. So, and getting through the door, that's what a lot of these consultants or even YouTube videos can help you figure out
Yeah.
how to do that. But once you meet those bare minimums, and the PhD is a great credential for that too. Okay, you have a PhD and you've been able to publish something like, all right, you understand research. They're really going to, for people transitioning from academia to industry, how efficient are you? Can you move quickly? Can you stay up to date? Because we don't have time to compare theoretical possibilities
Yeah.
here. So, you
Especially
need
in
to
social,
have,
especially in social
yeah,
sciences, we stay behind
yeah,
always. Like with
yeah. Yeah, I think what I sort of learned through my interviewing process was they were going to ask me that, like, how are you going to adjust from academia? And to have sort of a few bullet points, a little bit of what I went through before is that I like to get stuff done. And you can see that from my academic CV, but what that feels slow to me. I want to be in the industry. I want to make and apply difference. So telling them why I wanted the position helped them to believe, oh, okay, she's motivated. And I had some other examples. So I used to be a journalist, and I talked about, we had
Deadlines, yeah.
every night, there had to be accurate information put on air.
Yeah.
It had to meet that deadline, and it had to be right. And I think that really fits in a clinical science situation because we have to make sure we're keeping the patients safe. We have to make sure we're following all the regulatory guidelines and laws in each country. So I was able to, if I think what is helpful is to pull experiences you've had from academia, or think about, yeah, you need to make sure the questionnaire in Qualtrics was coded right, and we had to launch quickly because our study was about the election, and you can't push back that timeline. So find examples of when you had a deadline, you performed quickly, and you turned it around quickly too. So they were like, we have to write these reports. They're currently bottlenecked. You can't just wait forever. I said, for me, again, I could point back to being a journalist, but I even said, like, look at my CV. I can write. I was first author on these things. And so the more you can talk about how your personality fits a little faster pace, more why the applied end of it is important to you. And even with that, like we in academia, applied can kind of be like a bad word,
Yeah.
like, oh, you're not theoretical enough. But they don't even think of themselves as applied. They're like, we're setting goals and we're meeting our objectives. So like talking about, the end product and making sure that the timelines are met and that it's done right, things like that. So showing whatever examples you have about how you can do that and stay organized. Some jobs also are going to want to know, how do you manage people? There are a lot of people transition into project manager type positions. I was a little less interested in that because it's not the bureaucracy that excites me. But you have those skills as an academic, and some people love that stuff. They love keeping track of all the little things. But I could talk about, all right, like I had, a couple years ago, I had 6 PhD advisees, and I taught a 340 person class, and I published this many papers, and we submitted this many grants. And so I was like, I had to keep track of all of that. And you at X industry group have secretaries, a finance office. Like I've got my Excel spreadsheet with my budget on it. And so just talked about how I know all the different parts of this process. And even if I wouldn't have to do that in your industry position, I know how to talk to the accountant to make sure this is getting in on time, or to legal to make sure we're following this, or to ethics and compliance about or regulatory about the IRB. So
I
anything
think,
you can attach to something that moves stuff along, and that means you're organized and you can multitask, is going to be really attractive to
yeah,
industry.
so focusing on the transferable skills, how that can help you, being successful in this. So yeah, and I think sometimes industry people may not know that how little support is there for professors to do the thing
Mm-hmm.
do every day, and they do
Mm-hmm.
have people on every aspect that can help you with things, right? So, um, what was the most helpful and the least helpful thing for you throughout this process?
I really, this pains me to say because I'm an introvert and I do a great job of networking, but really, it's networking is really was the most helpful thing. In the end, it was talking to people and pushing myself to talk to, even
Yeah,
sort of
reaching out to
to
people.
use social network language like weaker ties, but just to get a feel for what was available and what might be helpful or not, and to talk to people. And I learned every little thing I learned, even if I didn't have an application go through or didn't get the next stage of an interview, I think really helped. I think the other hard thing is if you've decided you aren't a great fit for academia, but you don't know what to do. There are a million different types of jobs in industry. And I do know people who have had hired like sort of coaches to help them, or use some of these consultants, and they found them very useful. And
Yeah.
if I hadn't gotten this job at Cook Medical, I would have done that because I was at the point where I would go into LinkedIn and be like, oh, I could do that. Oh, that would be cool. And that was just too many different directions while doing my normal job. And that would feel really stressful. So I think the least helpful thing is just going into LinkedIn and typing researcher, because a million things pop up, or, and So trying to figure out first, like, what do you value? What are you kind of looking for? And then talking to people, and they can very quickly help you figure out, like, oh, this org would be a good fit or not, versus just getting like the fire hose of LinkedIn or whatever other resource you have. And one other thing that I will say is not super helpful. I do like the some of these groups that are people trying to transition from academia or PhDs to industry. I'll see the posts and people, this happens in every field and it happens within academia a lot too. When we have students going on the job market, you'll have someone who say, don't do that in your presentation, that's wrong. And I'll be like, why is that wrong? It's because they had some experience interviewing 20 years ago at a different university that has scarred them. And that just to remember that it's all context dependent. And so you'll see these personal testimonies about, well, you should never do this to get into industry. That's not necessarily true. That was their experience. And it is helpful, sort of the flip side of the networking. But especially when you're reading other people who you don't know and they don't know you, just keep in mind that it's not the same everywhere. And it's not going to be the same experience for
That's
everyone.
a really good, and that's a good transition to the next question. What would you advise to those who want to join industry and they're early in their career?
Yeah, I mean, especially for people who are early in your career, there are a lot of cool jobs out there. I again just had no idea myself, because I was very motivated to go into academia when I was a PhD student. I had worked a little bit as a journalism student or a journalist, and then also I had worked for the IU School of Journalism on the staff, and I had been able to work with faculty and our associate deans, and was like, wow, I want to be like these people. I want to do what they do, and it's
Yeah.
cool. And I still fully support the mission of academia, but I do wonder sometimes, wow, if I had known there are other things you could do with these skills, and sort of seen it, I don't know, who knows what would happen. So I would just explore, and I would start doing some of those, talking to alumni from your PhD program who have gone into industry, because almost every program, there's probably someone. So ask who those people are and get their take on it. And again, there are some books and some resources, and just sort of generally looking around before you go to the full fire hose, but seeing what is out there um, is a good idea too. But your skill set is needed. There are jobs out there. I don't know what the market's going to look like as we see a cutback in the federal workforce. It's going to, other than to say it will be more competitive, because there are
Yeah,
now a lot of
absolutely,
people, yeah,
absolutely.
with PhDs and a lot of experience in there too. But I don't think that should stop anyone from
Especially in
exploring.
academia, I think how the new administration policies, how it's going to change academia, especially after sending letters and things like that, it's going to be like really difficult for a lot of folks. So that's just a question. I'm not leaving academia. Just saying to people who are thinking like, oh, are you leaving? I'm not yet.
Not yet.
So
Yeah.
do you think is because on if you go on YouTube and you say like, oh, why I leave academia, for example, you type it there and it's like, academia is broken, we have a lot of problems, and like, oh, I see this is not working, academia is not for me. So do you think academia has problems?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so what are
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, where to start, and how to say it on a recording. Yeah, academia is a very old system, and that, some of the ways that's the cool thing about it. You go to a graduation ceremony and you see the big hoods, and you remember, oh, this has been going on for hundreds of years, and a very noble system to educate the next
generation?
um, generations and to advance research and arts and humanities, and that's great. I There is data. I should have looked it up before this podcast, but most of the full professors leaving academia are women, and that doesn't surprise me at
Hmm.
all. So women and people of color face a lot of institutional um, racism, sexism, intersectional identity issues. And then there's on top of the caregiving, and before, like I have kids, and you look around in academia, and especially at full, there aren't a lot of women with kids, or people with kids. And then, there are men with kids, but even if you especially look at women, and then if they do, they have one kid. And I had a daughter right before COVID, and then I ended up having twins. And I've had three kids. It's a lot of work. And so when there are meetings, Friday afternoons, that are like a happy hour meeting, I can't really go, or a last second meeting. And a lot of times things are scheduled last second, or so, and I need time to get babysitters and all that stuff. So, and then, what's also been interesting, again, everything's context dependent, but since the new administration and the executive orders about diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's not been any really forceful statement by my former employer. Yet my new employer, I've now done two separate DEI trainings. They had events all throughout Black History Month. They've started their Women's History Month events. Even though the FDA has, or at least temporarily took down some of their guidance on diversifying clinical trials, our company has said, we're doing this. This is good science, and it's good for our patients, and it's the right thing to do. And so that has been awesome. And academia is so frozen right now in a time when you would hope there would be more speaking up from presidents and board of trustees. There's quite the opposite, even at private universities that don't get state legislature funding, but they get federal funding for their research. So they're shifting. And obviously other industries are too, but there's a lot of talk about, even way before now, about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and maybe you do some things on the hiring end, but on as far as retention, it's much less actual work there. And so what are academia's problems? And there's also this I call it an arms race, 'cause I was a political science undergrad major, so, but we expect more and more out of every new faculty member, and empirical experimentalist. So I don't know how much this applies to qualitative or critical cultural work, but what would have gotten tenure a decade ago, we now expect so much more. And talking about work-life balance, like we're encouraging, like, just as numbers. And I like to write. I did publish a lot, but I felt this pressure to do that, and less to like take a step back and do bigger things. Yeah, and there's a lot of pressure too to get all these grants, but without the support to do it, without the actual staff. If you looked at people in schools of public health or colleges of medicine, they had professional grant staff, but in COM, we're like, try to get on those NIH things. Well, we don't have as many resources. So there's both just, yeah, and there's too many. We're training too many PhDs for the number of jobs we have. There aren't that many new faculty positions. Most of them are teaching contract 3-year
Visiting
positions,
adjunct, yeah.
visiting. So we're creating, if always, every time we would have a recruitment event, I would have this inner turmoil about, like, oh. And I started in the last few years saying, like, what would you do if you didn't get an academic job? I felt like that really was a huge turnoff to potential graduate students, but I wanted
Yeah.
to be honest with them. And so, and also then on the other end of it, undergraduates are very different, and they have very different expectations. This was happening before COVID, but COVID exacerbated it. And so it's a lot of this customer service model, and like, you didn't
It
take
is.
any
It is.
of the open book quizzes. What am I supposed to do to help you at this point? And so a lot of my time became dealing with just repeating myself constantly about sort of bare minimum standards. I literally pulled a muscle in my calf this fall lecturing, because I was just trying to get them to look at me, and I was jumping up and down and pulled a muscle because I was literally shouting and doing jumping jacks, and no one would look at me. And so I don't know I was really struggling to get students engaged. And for years, we're talking about student writing, and the writing isn't at the level we need it to be. And now AI, they're just a lot of
Oh
the
my God.
copying of the AI, and there were no systematic efforts to address that. So,
No,
some band-aids here and there are things to look like
no.
it was being addressed, but it really isn't being addressed. And that has to start earlier than college, but we don't have the resources to go in and teach what used to be sort of like high school, beginning high school writing to college students. And they don't have tolerance to read a full book anymore. That used to be a thing that you could assign. I regularly in my big intro classes would assign like two full books. So those are a few of the
Good, good.
difficulties, and I hope other people can work are able to address them. But I just felt like I was hitting my head against a brick wall a lot on some of those issues.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate that. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope people will find it useful to look out for some of the other options. If you are interested in to look for jobs outside academia, as you know, there's a lot of turmoil or chaos at the federal level, and which is trickling down to the state and the cities and the universities and in academia overall and the research institutions and everywhere. You just name it. So, thank you. We have to leave it there, Dr. Myrick. Appreciate that so much. It was lovely talking to you.